The wind that swept down from the northern peaks of the Montana Territory in the year 1878 did not just blow. It scoured. It carried the grit of 1,000 miles of unmapped wilderness, stripping the paint from the clapboard houses and embedding itself into the skin of anyone foolish enough to face it without a scarf. For Elise Carter, standing on the porch of her family's struggling homestead, the wind felt like the breath of the land itself, wild, indifferent, and terrifyingly vast. She was 18 years old, a girl with hair the color of dried wheat and eyes that always seemed to be searching for something beyond the horizon. In the small, dusty mirror above the wash basin inside, she saw a face that the town of Red Creek called plain and pious, the dutiful daughter of the widow Martha Carter. But out here, with the wind tugging at her skirts and the endless blue sky pressing down on the red earth, Elise felt a stirring in her chest that had no name in the hymnal she held every Sunday. The Carter Ranch sat precariously on the edge of the valley, a stretch of land that looked deceptively green thanks to the narrow, winding vein of the Bitter Creek. The creek was the lifeblood of the entire basin. It tumbled down from the high country, cutting through a massive, jagged scar in the earth known to the locals simply as the Red Canyon. To the ranchers, the water was money. To the railroad speculators, it was power. But to the Navajo, whose ancestral lands bled into this territory from the south, the canyon was something else entirely. It was a cathedral of stone, a place where the spirits of the holy people lingered in the shadows of the sandstone walls. Elise adjusted the heavy basket of wet laundry on her hip. Her mother's voice drifted from the kitchen window, sharp and anxious. "Elise, do not stand there dreaming. The dust will settle on those sheets before you even get them on the line." "Yes, Mother," Elise called back. Her voice was soft, trained to obedience. She moved toward the clothesline, her boots crunching on the dry earth. To the west, the Red Canyon glowed like a burning ember in the late afternoon sun. It was forbidden ground. The reverend at the church in town spoke of it as a den of vipers, a hiding place for the heathens who refused to accept the grace of civilization. The men in the saloons spoke of it with a different kind of heat, their hands hovering near their holsters as they swapped stories of cattle raids and scalping parties. Elise pinned a white sheet to the line, the fabric snapping in the breeze. She did not believe all the stories. She remembered a winter day, 10 years ago, when a blizzard had turned the world into a blinding white void. She had wandered too far from the house, a foolish child chasing a stray dog. The cold had begun to shut her body down, a gentle, numbing sleep creeping into her limbs. She remembered rough hands lifting her, the smell of wood smoke and sage, and the dark, lined face of an old woman who had wrapped her in a heavy wool blanket and carried her back to the edge of the Carter fence. The woman had not spoken a word of English, but her eyes had held no malice, only a weary kindness. That memory was a secret coal Elise kept burning in the ash of her daily life. It made it hard to hate the shadows in the canyon. High above the valley floor, perched on a limestone ridge that offered a view of the entire basin, Kai Yazi watched the girl's small figure moving among the white sheets. He was 27 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the stillness of his bearing made him seem older. He was Dine, a warrior of the Navajo, though the white soldiers called him a renegade and the townsfolk simply called him a threat. Kai lay flat on his stomach, his body blending seamlessly with the rock and scrub brush. He wore a mixture of traditional buckskin and durable trade cloth, a Winchester rifle resting easily beside him. He was not hunting game today. He was hunting intentions. His dark eyes shifted from the Carter Ranch to the dust cloud rising in the east. A carriage was approaching the town of Red Creek, black and beetle-like against the beige landscape. Kai narrowed his eyes. He knew that carriage. It belonged to the man who smelled of ink and iron, the man who directed the men with the survey stakes, Silas Crowley. Kai had pulled up 3 of Crowley's wooden stakes yesterday. They had been driven deep into the earth near the mouth of the canyon, right beside the spring where the people came to offer pollen to the water spirits. The stakes were a language Kai understood perfectly. They meant ownership. They meant fences. They meant the end of the open way. He shifted slightly, the leather of his vest creaking. His goal was not war. He had seen enough blood in his 27 years to fill the river below. He had seen the long walk, the starvation, the broken treaties. He wanted only to protect the canyon, to keep the sacred water pure for the ceremonies, and to keep his small band of families hidden and safe in the deep recesses of the stone maze. But the white men were pushing closer, like a rising tide. He looked back at the girl at the ranch. She was staring up at the canyon again. For a second, it felt as if she were looking right at him, though he knew he was invisible from that distance. He felt a strange ripple of unease. Innocence was a dangerous thing in this land. It usually got trampled. Kai slipped back from the edge, moving with the silence of a mountain lion, and disappeared into the shadows of the red rocks, down in the town of Red Creek. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, horse manure, and stale beer. It was a settlement clinging to the edge of existence, fueled by the promise of the coming railroad and the fear of what lay beyond the tree line. Silas Crowley stepped out of his carriage, dusting the road grime from his immaculate suit coat. He was a man who looked out of place in the rough-hewn street, yet walked with the confidence of someone who owned the very ground under his polished boots. He was the agent for the Intermountain Railroad Company, but in Red Creek, he was the closest thing to a king. He walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon, the silence spreading outward from the door as he entered. He did not drink whiskey. He drank power. He signaled to the barkeep for a glass of water, a deliberate gesture in a town where water was the most contentious subject of all. "Gentlemen," Crowley said, his voice smooth and carrying easily to the back of the room, "I trust the heat is treating you well. A grimy cowboy named Tate, who made his living drifting between ranches, spat onto the floor. Heat is fine. Crowley, it is the water that is the problem. My herd is thirsty, and that creek is running low." Crowley took a sip of his water, savoring it. The creek runs low because it is unregulated. It flows wastefully through the canyon, tapped by savages who do not know how to irrigate, who do not know the value of agriculture. He turned to face the room. "The railroad brings progress. It brings engineers. We can dam that water, channel it, ensure that every man in this room has enough for 500 head of cattle. But we cannot build infrastructure on land that is infested with hostiles." "The Army says that the canyon is federal land," a nervous shopkeeper spoke up. "But the Navajo say it is their church." Crowley smiled, a cold, tight expression that did not reach his eyes. "Superstition is not a property deed. My friend, civilization requires order, and if the army is too slow to bring order, perhaps it is up to the citizens to protect their own interests." He let the words hang there, a poisonous seed planted in fertile soil. He did not need to tell them to pick up their guns yet. He just needed them to be angry. He needed them to look at the red rocks and see an enemy, not a neighbor. If the ranchers drove the Navajo out, Crowley would step in, buy the devalued land for pennies on the dollar, and hand the water rights to the railroad. It was simple arithmetic. Back at the Carter Ranch, evening was descending. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and the wind had died down to a whisper. Inside the small wooden house, the table was set for supper. Martha Carter sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped in prayer. She was a woman worn thin by worry, since her husband had died 2 years ago, crushed by a spooked stallion. She had fought tooth and nail to keep the ranch floating, but the debts were mounting, and the cattle were getting thinner. "Bless this food to our use and us to thy service," Martha prayed, her voice brittle. "And protect us from the evils of the wilderness. Amen." "Amen," said Elise and her younger brother, Sam. Sam was 12 years old, with a mop of unruly hair and eyes that missed nothing. He picked up his fork and stabbed a potato. "I saw smoke up in the canyon today," he said, his mouth half full. Martha froze. "Sam, do not speak with your mouth full, and do not look at the canyon." "But it was blue smoke," Sam insisted, swallowing. "Not white man smokes. It was cooking smoke. Maybe they are having a feast." "They are savages, Samuel," Martha said sharply. "They do not have feasts." They have pagan rituals. They steal cattle and they murder good Christians. You are to stay away from that ridge. Do you hear me?" "Pa used to say they were just people," Sam muttered, looking down at his plate. "Your father was a kind man, but he was too soft for this world," Martha said, her eyes flashing. She turned to Elise. "And you, Elise, I saw you staring off again today." "You need to keep your mind on your work. We have to make the quota for the butter and cheese this month, or Mr. Crowley says the bank might not extend the loan." Elise cut her meat slowly. The name Crowley made her stomach tighten. "Mr. Crowley is always smiling. Mother," but his eyes are like a snake's. "He is a businessman. Elise, he offers us a way out. He says if the territory becomes safe, land values will go up. He wants to help us." Martha sighed, the anger draining out of her to reveal pure exhaustion. "I just want you two safe." "I want a world where I do not have to sleep with a shotgun by the bed." Elise reached out and touched her mother's rough hand. "We are safe, Mother. We have the house. We have each other." But later, as she lay in her narrow bed in the loft, listening to the coyotes yipping in the distance, Elise did not feel safe. She felt trapped. The walls of the house felt like a cage. She thought of the blue smoke Sam had seen. She imagined the people gathered around a fire in the canyon, speaking a language that flowed like water, living under the stars without fences or debts. She got up and crept to the window. The moon was rising, bathing the valley in silver light. The red canyon stood like a fortress against the night. Somewhere out there, the warrior she had never met was breathing the same air. She did not know his name was Kai. She did not know he was fighting a war for his soul. She only knew that the wind that rattled her window pane was calling her name, promising her something dangerous and beautiful. The next morning was Sunday, and the journey to the church in Red Creek was a ritual of dust and heat. The wagon creaked rhythmically as the old mare pulled them along the rutted road. Elise drove, her gloved hands steady on the reins, while Martha sat stiffly beside her, holding a parasol against the relentless sun. Sam sat in the back, his legs dangling off the tailgate, watching the hawks circle overhead. The church was a whitewashed, clapboard building that smelled of beeswax and stern judgment. It was the center of social life in Red Creek, the place where the moral boundaries of the territory were drawn and reinforced. Reverend Thomas stood at the pulpit, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He was a large man with a booming voice that seemed to shake the dust from the rafters. "And the Lord gave them dominion over the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air," he thundered, his fist pounding the Bible. "Dominion. Brothers and sisters, it is our sacred duty to tame this wild land, to bring light where there is darkness, to cultivate the earth and drive out the briars and the thorns." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the congregation. "And what are the tribes that refuse the light? Are they not the thorns? Do they not cling to their savage ways? Rejecting the plow and the gospel, we must pray for their souls. Yes, but we must also protect our heritage. We cannot let the heathen hinder the march of God's will." "Amen," shouted a man in the front row. It was Silas Crowley. He sat with his hat on his knee, looking at the picture of devout conviction. Elise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She looked around the room. The faces of the townspeople were hard, set in grim agreement. These were people she had known all her life, Mrs. Gable the baker, Mr. Henderson the blacksmith. They were good people who helped each other raise barns and birthing calves. But when they spoke of the Navajo, their faces changed. Fear twisted their features into something unrecognizable. She looked down at her hands. Dominion. She thought, is that what we are doing, or are we just talking after the service? The congregation spilled out onto the porch to socialize. The women gathered to trade recipes and gossip, while the men clustered around Crowley, lighting pipes and rolling cigarettes. "I heard they took 2 cows from Miller Place last night," one man said, his voice low. "2 cows," another replied. "I heard it was 5, and they poisoned the dog." "It is starting," Crowley said smoothly, shaking his head with feigned sadness. "Just as I warned. They are testing us. If we do not show strength now, no family will be safe by winter." Elise moved away from the voices, walking toward the edge of the churchyard where the fence looked out over the valley. Sam was there, throwing stones at a fence post. "They are lying, aren't they?" Sam asked quietly, not looking at her. "Hush. Sam," Elise whispered, glancing back to make sure no one was listening. "You cannot say that." "But the Miller place is 10 miles east," Sam said. "The Navajo are in the canyon to the west. Why would they go 10 miles east just to steal 2 skinny cows when the grass is better on the high ridge?" Elise looked at her brother, surprised by his logic. 12 years old, and he saw things the men inside refused to see. People believe what they are afraid of. "Sam." "I am not afraid," Sam said, throwing another stone. It hit the post with a sharp clack. "You should be," Elise said, her voice trembling slightly. "Fear keeps you alive out here." But as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Fear was what kept her mother awake at night. Fear was what made the Reverend preach about thorns. Fear was what Silas Crowley was selling. She looked toward the distant line of the canyon again. It was hazy in the heat. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to see it up close. Not to conquer it, not to fear it, but just to see it, to know if the monsters the town spoke of were real, or if they were just men like any other, trying to survive the wind. Elise did not know that her world was about to break open. She did not know that the man named Silas Crowley had already paid a group of drifters $50 each to paint their faces and ride fast horses under the moonlight. She did not know that in less than 24 hours, the fragile peace of the valley would be shattered by the sound of gunfire that was not what it seemed. All she knew was that the wind was picking up again, blowing dust into her eyes, stinging and persistent. It felt like a warning, or perhaps it was an invitation. The sun began its descent, turning the sky into a canvas of violent orange and bloody red. The day of rest was over. The time of testing was about to begin. And in the shadows of the Red Canyon, Kai Yazi tightened the cinch on his horse, checking his rifle one last time. He could smell the change in the air. The storm was coming, and this time, it would not just be wind. The wagon rattled violently over the hard-packed earth, the wooden wheels protesting with every revolution. The afternoon sun hung heavy and low in the western sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the scrub brush. Elise Carter gripped the leather reins, her knuckles white, trying to keep the old mare steady. Beside her, Sam sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, clutching the empty milk canisters that clattered against each other with a metallic rhythm. They were 5 miles from the safety of the ranch, moving through a stretch of land where the sagebrush grew tall and the wind carried strange, hollow sounds. They had delivered the weekly supply of cheese and milk to the general store in town, a meager income that barely kept the interest on the bank loan at bay. "Elise," Sam said, his voice small. "Do you hear that?" Elise tightened her grip on the reins. "Hear what, Sam? It is just the wind." "It is not the wind," Sam insisted, turning his head. "It sounds like hooves, fast ones." Elise snapped the reins, urging the mare to pick up the pace. "We are almost to the ridge. Just keep your eyes forward." But she heard it too, a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards of the wagon. It was not the rhythmic trot of a carriage. It was the chaotic thunder of a gallop. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and terrifying. Dust exploded near the mare's front hooves. The horse reared, screaming in panic, and the wagon lurched violently to the left. "Get down!" Elise shouted, throwing her arm across Sam's chest to pin him to the seat. 3 riders burst from the cover of a dry wash ahead of them. They were screaming, high-pitched war cries that chilled the blood. They wore buckskins and feathers, and their faces were smeared with red and black paint. To anyone looking from a distance, they were a war party. But as they closed in, circling the wagon like wolves, Elise saw details that made her mind stumble. One of them wore a heavy silver necklace that looked too shiny, too new. Another sat his horse not with the fluid grace of the Comanches or the Navajo she had seen from a distance, but with the heavy, stirrup-deep seat of a cavalryman. A rider spurred his horse alongside the wagon and fired his pistol into the air. The mare panicked completely, veering off the road and crashing through a patch of mesquite. The wagon wheel struck a hidden rock, and with a sickening crack of splintering wood, the axle gave way. Elise and Sam were thrown into the dirt. The world spun in a blur of blue sky and brown earth. Elise hit the ground hard, the air driven from her lungs. She gasped, rolling onto her knees. Her first thought for her brother. Sam. The riders did not stop. They circled the wrecked wagon, whooping and jeering. One of them lit a torch, a rag soaked in kerosene wrapped around a stick, and tossed it onto the dry wood of the wagon bed. The straw and canvas ignited instantly. Flames roared up, orange and hungry, devouring the only means of transport the Carter family possessed. "Run!" the leader shouted, though the word was garbled, as if he were trying to mask his accent. Sam scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with terror. He did not run toward the road. In his blind panic, he turned and bolted toward the only cover he could see, the jagged lip of the Red Canyon, 300 yards away. "Sam, no!" Elise screamed, forcing herself up. Her skirt was torn, and her palms were bleeding, but she ignored the pain. "Sam, stop!" The riders did not pursue the boy. They seemed content to watch the wagon burn, firing a few more shots into the dirt to ensure the chaos was absolute. Elise ran. She ran until her chest burned, her boots skidding on the loose gravel. Sam was fast, fueled by pure adrenaline, and he was heading straight for the treacherous drop-off where the prairie floor sheared away into the deep sandstone abyss. "Sam!" He disappeared over the rim. Elise's heart stopped. She reached the edge a moment later, skidding to a halt just as the ground crumbled beneath her toes. She looked down. Sam had not fallen to the bottom. He had slid down a steep slope of shale and scrambled onto a narrow ledge about 20 feet down, pressing himself flat against the red rock, shaking violently. "Stay there!" Elise cried out, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the canyon. "Do not move! Sam!" She looked for a way down. The rock was steep, but there were handholds. Without thinking, driven by the desperate need to reach him, she lowered herself over the edge. Her boots scrambled for purchase. She found a foothold, then another. The wind in the canyon was stronger, pulling at her dress, trying to peel her from the wall. She was 10 feet down when the sandstone under her right hand gave way. It happened in silence. The rock simply crumbled. Elise swung out, her weight tearing her left hand from its grip. She fell. She did not scream. She simply reached out, her fingers clawing at the empty air, bracing for the impact that would shatter her bones. But the impact never came. A hand clamped around her wrist. It was not a desperate grab. It was a lock of iron. Her fall stopped with a jerk that nearly dislocated her shoulder. She swung there, suspended over the drop. Staring up, a man was lying flat on a rock outcropping above her, his arm extended. His hair was black as a raven's wing, tied back with a strip of leather. His face was sharp-angled, the skin bronze against the red stone. He wore a necklace of turquoise and silver, but unlike the riders on the road, he looked old, the stones worn smooth by time. It was a Navajo warrior. Elise froze, terror warring with relief. The stories of the town rushed into her head, stories of scalping, of torture, of savagery. The man did not speak. He gritted his teeth, the muscles in his forearm cording as he pulled. He was incredibly strong. With a single, fluid motion, he hauled her up and over the lip of the outcropping. Elise scrambled back the moment her knees hit solid rock, pressing herself against the canyon wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at him, wide-eyed. He rose to a crouch, moving with the silent grace of a cat. He did not look at her immediately. His dark eyes were fixed on the rim of the canyon above, where the smoke from her burning wagon was drifting into the sky. "Sam," she whispered, remembering. She looked down. Sam was still on the lower ledge, staring up at them, his mouth open in shock. The warrior followed her gaze. He looked at Sam, then back at Elise. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "He is safe," the man said, His voice was deep, the English words heavily accented, shaped by a tongue used to different sounds. "The boy is stuck, but safe." Elise blinked, surprised he spoke English at all. You are Kai," he said. He pointed a finger toward the smoke rising above. "Those men, they are not dying. They are not of the people." Elise looked at him, confused. They wore feathers. They painted their faces." Kai made a sound in his throat, a sharp exhale of disgust. "Paint does not make a warrior. They ride like sacks of flour. They shoot like children." He turned his intense gaze on her. "They want you to think it was us." The realization hit Elise slowly. The boots, the shiny jewelry, the strange way they rode. White men. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To bring the bluecoats," Kai said. "To bring the soldiers." He stepped closer, and Elise instinctively flinched. He stopped instantly, respecting the distance. He looked at her fear, not with anger, but with a weary understanding. "Go, take the boy. There is a path there." He pointed to a narrow deer trail winding up the slope. "Do not come back to the water. It is not safe." "Wait," Elise said, as he turned to leave. "You saved me." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "The canyon is careless. I do not let the canyon take what is not hers." Then he was gone. He did not walk away. He simply vanished into the shadows of the rocks, blending so perfectly with the landscape that Elise wondered if he had been there at all. Getting Sam up the trail took nearly an hour. By the time they crawled back onto the prairie floor, the sun was setting. The wagon was a smoldering skeleton of blackened wood and twisted iron. The mare was gone, fled into the open range. They began the long walk back to the ranch in silence. Sam held Elise's hand, his grip tight. "That was him, wasn't it?" Sam whispered after a long time. "The one from the stories. He was not a monster. Elise, he had sad eyes." "Hush, Sam," Elise said, though her own heart was hammering a rhythm she could not quiet. She could still feel the imprint of his fingers on her wrist. It was a burn that went deeper than skin. They were met 2 miles from the ranch by a group of riders. It was the sheriff and 3 men from town, including Tate, the rough-looking cowboy who worked for anyone who paid. Martha Carter was in the sheriff's buggy, her face pale as chalk. "Elise Samuel," Martha screamed, jumping down before the buggy had fully stopped. She ran to them, gathering them into her arms, weeping. "Oh, thank God, thank God." "We saw the smoke," the sheriff said, a heavy-set man with a mustache that drooped over his mouth. "What happened, girl?" Elise opened her mouth to speak, but Tate rode forward, holding something up in the fading light. It was an arrow, broken in half. "Found this near the wagon," Tate announced loudly. "And look at the tracks. Unshod ponies. It was a raiding party. Navajo." Elise stared at the arrow. She had been there. She had seen the men. They had used pistols and rifles. She had not seen a single bow. "No," Elise said, her voice shaking. "Sheriff, they had guns. They were wearing boots. I saw." "They wear boots when they steal them from dead settlers." Tate cut in sharply, his eyes boring into hers. "And they use guns they take from the army. Do not be naive. Miss Carter, you are lucky to be alive. If they had not been scared off by something, you would be." He left the sentence unfinished, letting the horror hang in the air. "It was the savages," Martha sobbed, stroking Sam's hair. "I knew it. I knew they would come for us." Elise looked at her mother, then at the sheriff, then at Tate. She saw the hard certainty in their faces. She knew, with a sudden, sinking feeling, that the truth did not matter to them. They had the story they wanted. "But," Elise tried again, "one of them, he helped me. A Navajo man. He pulled me from the canyon." The sheriff frowned. "Pulled you up or was trying to drag you down?" "He saved me," Elise insisted. "Likely he was saving you for something worse." Tate spat. "You are in shock. Miss, you do not know what you saw." Elise fell silent. She felt the trap closing around her. If she defended the man in the canyon, she would sound like a madwoman, or worse, a sympathizer. In this town, being a sympathizer was a dangerous thing. They rode back to the ranch in a grim procession. The loss of the wagon and the supplies was a heavy blow, but the fear that now permeated the air was heavier. The next morning, Silas Crowley arrived at the Carter Ranch. He came in his black carriage, looking pristine despite the dust. He found Martha sitting on the porch, staring blankly at the horizon. Elise was inside, sweeping the floor, but she could hear every word through the screen door. "Mrs. Carter," Crowley said, his voice dripping with concern. "I heard about the attack. A tragedy. An absolute tragedy." "We lost the wagon," Martha said dully. "And the milk money, and the horse. Material things can be replaced," Crowley said, taking a seat on the railing. "But the safety of your children, that is priceless." "I warned the town council. I told them the Navajo were getting bold. They are wild animals. Martha, and you are living right on the edge of their den." He leaned forward. "I have a solution. I have spoken to the governor. If we can prove the hostility of the tribe and this attack is proof enough, we can get a federal fort established here. Soldiers, cannons. The railroad will follow. Civilization. Martha, safety. What do you want from me?" "Mr. Crowley?" Martha asked. Crowley pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "I know you are struggling with the loan payments. And now, without the wagon, well, it will be difficult. I am prepared to buy the 40 acres closest to the creek. I will pay you double the market value. In gold." Elise stopped sweeping. The 40 acres by the creek was their best grazing land. It was also the land that bordered the canyon entrance. "Double," Martha's voice wavered. "Enough to pay off the bank. Enough to buy a new wagon, new horses. Enough to send Sam to a proper school in the east. Away from this danger," Crowley said. "But I need the deed signed, and I need your testimony. You must tell the judge that the Navajo attacked your family unprovoked." "I did not see it," Martha said. "Elise did." "Then Elise will testify." Crowley said, "It is a simple thing. She tells the truth that painted men attacked her. That is all." Elise stepped out onto the porch. The sunlight hit her face, revealing the bruise on her cheek from the fall. "And if I say they were not Navajo?" Elise asked quietly. Crowley turned to her. His smile did not falter, but his eyes went cold. "Now, why would you say that? Miss Elise, everyone knows who holds that canyon. Everyone knows who hates the settlers." "I saw their boots," Elise said. "I saw the way they rode." Crowley stood up, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "Confusion is common in trauma, but think carefully. Elise, your mother owes the bank $400. The payment is due in 30 days. If you do not have the money, the bank takes the ranch. All of it. You will be on the street." He let the threat sink in. "If you sign the sale for the creek land," Crowley continued, looking back at Martha, "I will cover the debt immediately. You keep the house. You keep the rest of the land. And we bring the army in to make sure no savage ever touches you again." He placed the paper on the small table beside Martha. "Think about it. I will return in 2 days for your answer. Do not let pride cost you your home." He tipped his hat and walked to his carriage. That night, the silence in the house was suffocating. Martha sat by the lamp, mending a shirt, her hands trembling. "We have to do it," Martha whispered. "We have to sell." "Mother, he is lying," Elise said, sitting across from her. "Those men were hired. I feel it. If we sell, we are giving him exactly what he wants. He wants the water. I do not care about the water." Martha snapped, tears spilling over. "I care about you. I care about Sam. If we lose the ranch, where do we go? Who will take in a widow and 2 children with nothing?" "But if we blame the Navajo, the army will come," Elise said. "They will kill them. They will kill the man who saved me. He is a savage." "Elise," Martha cried. "He is not one of us. Why do you care about him more than your own family?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Elise could not answer. How could she explain the grip of his hand? How could she explain the look in his eyes that held more honor than all of Crowley's fine suits? She went to her room, but she could not sleep. She lay in the dark, feeling the walls closing in. 30 days, $400. If she told the truth, she would be branded a liar and a traitor. Her family would lose everything. If she lied, she would save her home. She would save her mother from destitution. But the price would be blood. The blood of the people in the canyon. The blood of Kai. She closed her eyes and saw his face again. The canyon takes the careless. Elise realized with a jolt that she was no longer just a girl on a ranch. She had stepped off the edge of her safe life, just as she had stepped off that cliff. And this time, there might be no hand to catch her. She rose from her bed and went to the small wooden box where she kept her charcoal and paper. She pulled out a sheet and began to draw. She did not draw the wagon or the fire. She drew the line of a jaw, the angle of a cheekbone, the intensity of dark eyes under a high brow. She needed to see him again, not to save her, but to understand. She needed to know if the man who had pulled her from the abyss was real, or if he was just a ghost of her own desperate imagination. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the scent of sage and impending storm. The game had begun, and Elise Carter held a card she did not know how to play. But she knew one thing for certain: she could not let the lie become the truth. Not without a fight. 2 days had passed since the attack on the wagon, and the silence at the Carter Ranch was heavier than the limestone slabs of the canyon walls. To Elise Carter, the house felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a tomb where the living were waiting to be buried by debt and fear. Her mother moved through the rooms like a ghost, her lips moving in silent prayer, her eyes darting to the window every time the wind rattled the pane. Elise could not breathe in that air. She told her mother she was going to check the fence line along the northern ridge, a task that usually fell to Sam. The boy was still shaken, jumping at the sound of a door slamming. Martha had nodded absently, her mind occupied with the terrifying arithmetic of $400 and 30 days. Elise saddled the roan gelding, the only reliable horse left after the mare had bolted during the attack. She packed a canteen of water and her sketchbook, a small, leather-bound volume that held the only secrets she possessed. She did not drive north. As soon as she dipped below the rise that hid her from the house, she turned the horse west, toward the bleeding gash in the earth that was the Red Canyon. It was a foolish thing to do. She knew it. The sheriff's warning still rang in her ears, and the memory of the burning wagon was a fresh scorch mark on her mind. But the memory of the hand that had caught her was stronger. She needed to know. She needed to see if the monsters lived in the canyon, or if the monsters were the ones who wore suits and smiled like snakes. The heat of the afternoon was oppressive. The sun hammered down on the red earth, baking the scent of sage and dust into the air. Elise tied the gelding in a cluster of scrub oak near the entrance of the canyon, hidden from the main trail. She proceeded on foot, clutching her sketchbook against her chest like a shield. The canyon was a world apart. The moment she stepped between the towering walls, the temperature dropped. The air here was still, heavy with the smell of damp stone and pinon pine. It was quiet, but not empty. It felt watched. Elise moved slowly, her boots making no sound on the sand. She was looking for signs of camp, a fire, the painted warriors Tate had described. She found signs, but they were not what she expected. Near a cluster of boulders, she saw footprints. They were heavy boot prints, the heels digging deep into the soil. Unlike the soft moccasins of the Navajo, she knelt, brushing the dirt away. Beside the print, half buried in the sand, was something that glinted in a stray beam of sunlight. She picked it up. It was a brass casing from a rifle, a Sharp's carbine. It was the kind of heavy, long-range weapon used by buffalo hunters in the army, not the older trade muskets or bows usually carried by the tribes. A few feet away, she found the stub of a cigar. She lifted it to her nose. It smelled of expensive Virginia tobacco, sweet and pungent. Elise felt a chill run down her spine. Navajo warriors did not smoke 20-cent cigars. She looked back toward the town, her suspicion hardening into a knot in her stomach. Someone had stood here, watching the road, waiting. She tucked the casing and the cigar stub into the pocket of her dress. She needed to go deeper. She needed to find the water. The sound of the spring drew her further in. It was a musical trickling, echoing off the stone walls. She followed a narrow deer trail that wound through a thicket of willows, the branches catching at her skirt. The noise of the water grew louder, masking the sound of her own breathing. She pushed through a final screen of green leaves and stopped dead. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had stumbled into a secluded alcove, a natural bowl of rock where the spring pooled before cascading down toward the valley. The water was a deep, clear turquoise, fed by a small waterfall that spilled over a ledge of mossy stone. And standing under the waterfall was Kai. He was not the terrifying shadow who had pulled her from the cliff. He was a man. He stood with his back to her, unaware of her presence, the water sluicing over his bronze skin in shimmering sheets. He was naked. Elise had lived 18 years in a world of high collars and long sleeves, a world where the body was a vessel of sin to be covered and ignored. She had never seen a man unclothed, not even in pictures. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp intake of air that she could not suppress. He was magnificent. That was the only word her stunned mind could form. His shoulders were broad and tapered down to a narrow waist, the muscles shifting under his skin like water flowing over rock. His hair was loose, a curtain of wet ink that clung to his back. But it was the scars that held her gaze. There was a long, jagged white line running across his right shoulder blade, a testament to a blade or a bullet. Another scar, older and fainter, marked his ribs. They were maps of violence written on a body that exuded a powerful, quiet grace. This was not the savage beast the Reverend preached about. This was flesh and blood, strength and vulnerability exposed to the sun and the stone. Elise knew she should turn. She should run. She should cover her eyes and pray for forgiveness. But her feet were rooted to the sandstone. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. A heat that had nothing to do with the sun rose in her cheeks, spreading down her neck. It was shame, yes, but beneath the shame was something else, a pull, a magnetic force that made her want to step closer rather than retreat. Then, the wind shifted. A dry twig snapped under her boot. Kai spun around with the speed of a striking snake. Water sprayed from his hair as he turned, his body tense, ready for a fight. His eyes found her instantly. For a second, neither of them moved. Elise stood paralyzed, her hands gripping her sketchbook so hard her knuckles were white. She saw the flash of shock in his dark eyes, followed instantly by a blaze of anger. And then, as he registered exactly who was standing there, a flicker of stunned recognition. He did not shout. He did not lunge for a weapon, though his rifle lay on a rock 10 feet away. Instead, he snatched a buckskin breechclout that hung from a low branch and wrapped it around his waist in one fluid motion. "You," he said. His voice was low, rough with the shock of the intrusion. "You have a habit of walking where you do not belong." Elise found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. I did not know. I heard the water. She could not finish the sentence. Her face was burning. She squeezed her eyes shut, turning her head away sharply. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." She waited for him to yell, to threaten her, to drive her out, but there was only the sound of the water and the heavy silence between them. "Open your eyes," Kai said. His voice was closer now. Elise opened them slowly, keeping her gaze fixed on his face, terrified to look lower. He was standing 5 feet away. He had pulled on his leggings and was fastening a belt, his chest still bare and wet, gleaming in the dappled light. He looked at her, and the anger in his face softened into something more complex. He saw the blush that stained her pale skin, the trembling of her hands. He realized that she was not a spy sent to catch him off guard. She was just a girl who had walked into the wrong room. "Why are you here?" he asked, his tone guarded but not hostile. "I told you the water is not safe." Elise swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass casing and the cigar stub. Her hands shook as she held them out to him. "I came to find the truth," she said. And I found this. Kai stepped forward and took the objects from her palm. His fingers brushed hers, a brief, electric contact that made Elise draw a sharp breath. His skin was cool from the water, hers burning hot. He examined the casing, turning it over in his calloused fingers. A Sharps, he murmured. He sniffed the cigar. White man tobacco. Navajo do not smoke cigars, Elise said, her voice gaining a little strength. And they do not wear army boots. I saw the tracks. Kai looked up at her, his dark eyes searching hers. You came back to prove we were innocent. I came back because I know what I saw on the road. Elise said, those men who burned our wagon, they wanted us to hate you. They wanted my mother to sell the land. Kai's expression darkened. Crowley. He offered to buy the land by the creek, Elise said. He said if we sell, the army will come and protect us. He gave us 30 days. Kai looked past her, toward the mouth of the canyon, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He wants the water. If the army comes, they will build a fort. They will fence the spring. My people will be pushed into the desert to starve. He is trying to start a war, Elise said. He thinks if he makes us afraid enough, we will kill each other for him. She looked at him, really looked at him. The water was drying on his chest, leaving his skin the color of polished copper. He stood tall and proud, a warrior defending a home that was being stolen inch by inch. And she was the daughter of the invaders. I cannot let him do it, Elise whispered. I cannot let him win. Kai looked at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy with the unspoken awareness of their proximity. They were alone in a hidden paradise. Enemies by birth, allies by circumstance. You are playing a dangerous game, Elise Carter, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded strange and beautiful on his tongue. I know, she said. If they see you here, with me. He let the sentence hang. They both knew what it meant. Ruin for her. A noose for him. They won't see me, she said. But I need to know what he is doing. I can watch him in town. I can listen. And I will watch the canyon, Kai said. I will find where he is hiding his hired dogs. We have to stop him, Elise said. We will, Kai said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Yet she did not flinch. He smelled of mountain water and sage. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It was a gesture so tender, so unexpected, that Elise felt tears prick her eyes. Go, he said softly. Before the sun gets low, meet me here in 3 days, but do not come quietly. Throw a stone, whistle, do not surprise me again. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, and Elise felt her heart turn over. I promise, she breathed. She turned and fled back down the trail, her heart racing faster than the horse she rode. She did not look back, but she could feel his eyes on her until she was clear of the canyon walls. The ride back to the ranch was a blur. Elise felt as if her skin was vibrating, every nerve ending alive and singing. She had touched the fire, and she had not been burned. She had been awakened. When she rode into the yard, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold. The house looked small and gray against the vastness of the land. She stabled the horse and walked into the kitchen. Martha was at the stove, stirring a pot of beans. The air was thick with the smell of pork fat and coffee, a sharp contrast to the clean, wild scent of the canyon. You were gone a long time, Martha said without turning. Her voice was tight with worry. I was about to send Sam to look for you. I just needed to think. Mother, Elise said, moving to the basin to wash her hands. She scrubbed them hard, as if she could wash away the memory of Kai's touch, the phantom sensation of his cool fingers on her palm. Martha turned, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her. She saw the flush in Elise's cheeks, the brightness in her eyes that had not been there that morning. You look different, Martha said, narrowing her eyes. Where did you go? Elise? Just the North Ridge. Elise lied. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Like I said. Martha walked over and gripped Elise's chin, tilting her face up to the light. "You are 18 years old. You are a grown woman. You have a duty to this family." "I know my duty," Elise said, pulling away gently. "Do you?" Martha asked. "Mr. Crowley's foreman, Mr. Garrett, stopped by today. He asked about you. He is a decent man. He has a steady wage. If you were to encourage him, it would secure our future." Elise stared at her mother. Mr. Garrett was a man with tobacco-stained teeth and eyes that undressed her every time she walked into town. "Mother, you cannot be serious. He is one of Crowley's men." "He is a white man," Martha hissed, her fear boiling over into anger. "He can protect you. Do you think you can survive out here in your dreams? Look at us. Elise, we are alone. We are vulnerable. Every night I lie awake wondering if those savages are going to come down and slaughter us in our beds. I want you safe. I want you settled. Safety is not worth selling my soul," Elise said quietly. "Your soul," Martha laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Your soul will not feed your brother. Your soul will not keep the roof over our heads. You need to grow up. Elise, the world is not a fairy tale. It is hard, and it is cruel, and you have to do what is necessary to survive." Elise looked at her mother, a woman broken by this land, shaped by fear until she could no longer see the truth. She felt a surge of pity, but also a steeling of her own resolve. "I will help save this ranch." "Mother," Elise said, "but I will do it my way." She walked past her mother and climbed the ladder to the loft. She sat on her bed and opened her sketchbook. Her charcoal hovered over the paper. She did not draw Mr. Garrett. She did not draw the ranch. She drew a waterfall. She drew the curve of a strong back, the jagged line of a scar that told a story of survival. She drew a pair of eyes that held the depth of the night sky. She touched the paper, smudging the charcoal slightly. She felt like a traitor to her mother, to her race, to everything she had been taught. But as she looked at the drawing, she knew she was not betraying herself. Crowley was planning a war. He was going to use her family as pawns to get his water and his railroad. If she did nothing, the blood would be on her hands. She thought of Kai standing in the water, his chest bare, his eyes fierce. "We will stop him," he had said. Elise closed the book and hid it under her mattress. She lay down in the dark, listening to the wind. It no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a promise. She was done being afraid. She was done being the dutiful daughter who looked at the ground. In 3 days, she would go back to the canyon. She would go back to him. And this time, she would not be the girl who stumbled. She would be the woman who stood her ground. The weeks that followed were a slow tightening of a noose. The valley, usually wide and open to the endless Montana sky, began to feel claustrophobic. Silas Crowley moved with the relentless efficiency of a machine. He did not wait for the 30-day deadline to approach. He accelerated the inevitable. Elise watched from the porch as a surveyor's wagon, flanked by 4 men in the blue uniforms of the Federal Cavalry, rolled past the Carter fence line. They did not stop at the house. They rode straight for the mouth of the canyon. The soldiers were not there to fight, not yet, but their presence was a heavy, silent statement. They were there to escort the surveyors, men who drove wooden stakes into the earth with heavy mallets, marking boundaries that had never existed before. Elise could hear the thud, thud, thud of the mallets echoing off the canyon walls. It sounded like a heartbeat, steady and ominous. "They are measuring the water flow," Sam said, standing beside her. He had grown quieter since the attack on the wagon. "Crowley says the creek belongs to the government now." "Crowley says a lot of things," Elise murmured. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. She had kept her promise to Kai. Every 2 or 3 days, she found a reason to ride out to look for stray calves, to gather sage, to check the fence, and every time, she found her way to the hidden alcove where the water sang against the stone. Their meetings were brief at first, shadowed by the fear of discovery. They would sit on opposite sides of the stream, exchanging information like spies in a war zone. Elise told him about the soldiers, about the map she had seen in the general store where the canyon was labeled Future Reservoir Site B. Kai told her about the anger simmering in his camp. The young men are restless. Kai told her one afternoon. He was sharpening a knife against a smooth river stone, the rhythmic shh sound filling the silence. They see the stakes. They see the soldiers washing their boots in our drinking water. They want to fight. You have to tell them to wait, Elise pleaded. If they shoot a soldier, Crowley gets exactly what he wants. He needs a reason to bring the whole regiment. I tell them, Kai said, looking up. His eyes were tired. But hunger makes men deaf, and pride makes them blind. We are running low on ammunition for hunting. The traders will not sell to us anymore. As the days turned into weeks, the space between them on the bank of the stream grew smaller. The talk of war and strategy began to give way to something else, a fragile, tentative sharing of souls. Elise found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, not even Sam. She told him about her father, a man who had loved poetry but loved whiskey more, a man who would weep when he saw a beautiful sunset and then drink until he passed out in the barn. He was not bad, Elise said, tracing a pattern in the sand with a twig. He was just broken. He thought this land would fix him, but the land just takes what you give it. Kai listened, his stillness a comfort she had never known. In return, he spoke of his own ghosts. He spoke of the Long Walk, years ago, when the army had forced his people to march hundreds of miles to a desolate reservation. He spoke of his mother, who had hummed songs of the harvest even when there was no corn to grind, just to keep the children from crying. She taught me that the earth has a memory, Kai said. That is why we cannot leave the canyon. Our ancestors are in the rocks. If we leave them alone. It was in these quiet moments that Elise realized the terrifying truth. She was not just an ally. She was falling in love with the enemy. It was a love that felt like treason, a betrayal of her mother, her church, and her race. But when she looked at Kai, she did not see a savage. She saw a man who carried the weight of a dying world on his shoulders and still had the grace to listen to a girl's small sorrows. Then came the storm. It hit on a Tuesday afternoon, a day when the heat had been building since dawn, thick and suffocating. Elise had ridden out to the canyon later than usual. She had just dismounted near the alcove when the sky turned a bruised, sickly green. The wind died instantly, leaving a vacuum of silence that made the hair on her arms stand up. Elise! Kai appeared from the rocks above, sliding down the slope with urgent grace. He did not greet her. He grabbed the bridle of her horse. Tie him tight, Kai ordered. Deep in the brush, it is coming fast. Elise had barely secured the horse when the sky cracked open. It was not rain at first. It was wind, a solid wall of air that screamed like a banshee. It picked up the red dust of the valley and turned the world into a blinding, stinging vortex. Come! Kai grabbed her hand. His grip was hard, desperate. He pulled her not toward the alcove, but toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall she had never noticed. They squeezed through the opening just as the heavens unleashed a deluge. Thunder shook the ground beneath their feet, a physical blow that rattled Elise's teeth. They stumbled into a small, shallow cave, dry and protected from the wind. Outside, the world disappeared into a chaotic gray curtain of water and dust. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in seconds. Elise was gasping, her chest heaving from the run and the sudden drop in pressure. She sank down against the back wall of the cave, wrapping her arms around herself. She was terrified of storms. Since she was a child, the sound of thunder had sounded like the wrath of God to her. Another boom of thunder exploded directly overhead, deafening and violent. Elise let out a small cry and buried her face in her knees. She felt a weight settle over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of wood smoke and leather. Kai had taken off his heavy buckskin shirt and draped it over her. It is just noise, Kai said. His voice was close, calm, cutting through her panic. The thunder people are passing through. They are loud, but they bring the rain. It is a good thing. Elise looked up. In the dim light of the cave, Kai was sitting beside her, his chest bare to the damp air. He was shivering slightly, having given her his only warmth. You are cold, Elise whispered. "I am fine," he said. "No," she said. The instinct to care for him overrode her fear. She shifted, opening the heavy leather shirt. "Come here. There is room." Kai hesitated. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation or revulsion. He saw only concern. He moved closer. They sat side by side, huddled under the stiff buckskin. The space was small, forcing their bodies to press together. Elise could feel the heat radiating from his skin, burning through the thin cotton of her dress. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. The storm raged outside, a fury of water and light. But inside the cave, time seemed to suspend. Elise looked at his profile in the flashes of lightning. He was staring out at the rain, his jaw set. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the scar on his shoulder, the white line she had drawn in her sketchbook. Kai flinched, turning his head sharply to look at her. He did not pull away. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "Only when it rains," he said softly. Elise left her hand there. Her thumb brushed the rough skin of the scar. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. All the warnings of the Reverend, all the lectures from her mother about purity and the dangers of men, dissolved in the presence of this living, breathing reality. "Elise," Kai said, his voice rough. It was a warning, and a plea. She did not pull back. She leaned in, drawn by a gravity she could no longer resist. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and searching. "I am not afraid," she said, though she was terrifyingly afraid not of him, but of the precipice she was standing on. Kai made a sound low in his throat, a surrender. He turned fully toward her. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek. His palm was calloused, rough against her skin, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He lowered his head. Elise closed her eyes, her breath hitching. When his lips touched hers, it was not like the romance novels she had hidden under her bed. It was desperate. It tasted of rain and dust. It was clumsy and fierce and devastatingly real. It was a collision of two worlds that were supposed to remain separate. Elise's hands found their way to his neck, tangling in his damp hair. For a moment, she forgot who she was. She forgot she was Carter, a good Christian girl. She was just a woman in the dark, holding on to the only thing that felt true. They broke apart as a crack of lightning illuminated the cave, turning everything stark white for a split second. They stared at each other, chest heaving, eyes wide with the shock of what they had just done. Kai pulled back slightly, his hand still lingering on her neck. He looked at her with a mixture of wonder and deep sorrow. "This," he whispered, "this is dangerous, more dangerous than the soldiers." "I know," Elise said, her voice shaking, "but I do not care." "You should," Kai said. "If they find out, they will shame you. They will cast you out. And if they find you," Elise said, tears welling in her eyes, "they will hang you." "I am already a dead man walking," Kai said grimly. "But you have a life." "Not a life I want," Elise said. "Not without this." They sat in silence as the storm began to weaken, the thunder rolling away into the distance like a retreating army. They held hands under the buckskin, fingers interlaced. It was a pact, sealed in the dark. When the rain stopped, the reality of the world outside rushed back in. They had to leave. They had to return to the lines that had been drawn in the sand. But the lines had blurred. Elise knew, as she rode back to the ranch under a sky washed clean and blue, that she could never go back to who she was before the storm. The trouble was waiting for her when she returned. Smoke was rising in the east, thick and black against the twilight. It was not the ranch. It was the Miller place, 3 miles down the valley. By the time Elise reached her own porch, a group of riders had gathered in the yard. Silas Crowley was there, along with the sheriff and half a dozen grim-faced ranchers. Martha Carter stood by the door, wringing her hands, her face pale. "Where have you been?" Martha cried when she saw Elise. "We were terrified the Miller's barn. It is gone, burned to the ground." Elise slid from her horse, her legs feeling heavy. "What happened?" "Navajo," Crowley said. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked immaculate, untouched by the storm or the disaster. They raided while the storm was hitting. Cowardly. They took 4 horses and set fire to the stable. Old Man Miller was pistol-whipped trying to save his stock. No, Elise said immediately. That is impossible. Crowley raised an eyebrow. Impossible. Miss Elise, we found a moccasin print in the mud. We found an arrow stuck in the doorframe. It is a lie, Elise said, her voice rising. They were sheltering from the storm, just like everyone else. And how would you know where the Navajo were during the storm? Crowley asked softly. The question hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Elise felt the blood drain from her face. She saw her mother looking at her, eyes wide with sudden suspicion. I just know, Elise stammered. They are not stupid. They would not raid in a thunderstorm. Savagery does not follow logic, Crowley said dismissively. He turned back to Martha. Mrs. Carter, this is what I was warning you about. It is escalating. Today the Millers, tomorrow. He looked meaningfully at the house. We have to do something, one of the ranchers growled. I say we ride on the canyon tonight. No, Crowley said, holding up a hand. Not yet. We need the army to sanction it. We need to be lawful, but we must protect our own. He turned his gaze to Elise, a predator sensing weakness. Mrs. Carter, I've been thinking, with things getting so dangerous, a house without a man is a target. My foreman, Mr. Garrett, he is looking for a wife. He is a strong man. He could run this ranch, ensure its safety. Elise felt like she had been punched. She looked at Mr. Garrett, who was sitting on his horse at the back of the group. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth, and tipped his hat. If Elise were to accept his suit, Crowley continued, his voice smooth as oil, I would consider the debt on this ranch paid in full. As a wedding gift. Mother, Elise gasped, looking at Martha. You cannot listen to him. Martha looked at Crowley, then at the smoking horizon, then at her daughter. The fear in her eyes was absolute. Mr. Garrett is a steady man, Martha whispered. He is a thug, Elise shouted. He works for the man who is burning our neighbors. Silence, Martha snapped. Go inside. Elise, go inside right now. Crowley smiled. Think of it, Martha. Safety, security, a future. I will give you 24 hours. The men rode away, leaving the smell of dust and menace in the air. Inside the house, the explosion that had been building for weeks finally detonated. How could you? Elise demanded, pacing the kitchen. He is trying to sell me like a broodmare to cover a debt. I am trying to keep you alive, Martha screamed back. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. Do you think I want this? Do you think this is easy? But look out the window. Elise, the world is burning. We are alone. We are not alone if we stand up for the truth. The truth, Martha laughed bitterly. The truth is that we are poor women in a land that eats the weak, and you are disappearing. Elise, you ride off for hours. You come back with your hair wild, smelling of rain and musk. Martha stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She walked over to Elise's bed in the corner of the room. Mother, don't, Elise warned. Martha reached under the mattress and pulled out the leather-bound sketchbook. No, Elise lunged, but Martha was faster. She opened the book. The pages fluttered past sketches of the canyon, of the rocks, of the birds. And then, the charcoal drawings of him. The warrior, the profile, the back with the scar, the eyes that looked out from the paper with a haunting intensity. Martha stared at the drawings. Her face turned white, then red. This, Martha whispered, her voice trembling with revulsion. This is where you go. This is who you are with. Mother, please! You are meeting a savage, Martha screamed, throwing the book onto the table. Have you lost your mind? Have you lost your soul? He is a heathen. He is the enemy. He is a man, Elise shouted back, the tears finally falling. He is more of a man than Crowley, more than Garrett. He saved my life, and he is innocent. He has bewildered you, Martha said, clutching her chest. He has cast some spells. You are going to be the ruin of us. If the town sees this, if Crowley sees this, we are finished. You will be branded a traitor, a whore to a savage." The words hung in the air, ugly and brutal. Elise wiped her face. A cold calm settled over her. She looked at the sketchbook, then at her mother. "I am not a whore," Elise said quietly. "And I am not a traitor. I am the only one in this house who is seeing clearly." "Where are you going?" Martha cried as Elise grabbed her shawl. "I am going to the barn," Elise said. "Because if I stay in here, I will suffocate. If you walk out that door to go to him," Martha warned, "do not come back." Elise paused at the door. She looked back at the woman who had raised her, the woman who loved her but was drowning in fear. "I am not going to him tonight," Elise said. "I am going to pray, but not for forgiveness. Mother, I am praying for courage, because one of us has to have it." She walked out into the night. The air was cool after the storm. The smoke from the Miller Ranch still stained the eastern sky. Elise sat on a bale of hay in the dark barn, listening to the breathing of the horses. She knew what she had to do. Crowley was going to destroy them all. He would burn the valley to get his railroad. He would kill Kai. He would sell her to Garrett. She could not let it happen. She needed proof, real proof, not just a cigar butt or a suspicion. She needed to find the men who were doing the burning. She needed to expose the lie before the army marched. And she needed to tell Kai. She touched her lips, remembering the taste of the rain and the desperation of his kiss. "If everything falls apart," she whispered to the darkness, "at least we stood. Tomorrow, she will go back to town. She would watch. She would listen. And when she found the thread that would unravel Crowley's web, she would pull it, no matter what it cost her." The girl who had been afraid of thunder was gone. In her place was a woman who had weathered the storm. The sun sank behind the western peaks, leaving the sky the color of a fresh bruise. In the town of Red Creek, the atmosphere was not one of rest, but of a coiled, venomous anticipation. The air smelled of torch pitch and cheap whiskey. Elise Carter stood in the shadow of the livery stable, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The news had spread through the town with the speed of a prairie fire mister. Henderson, the blacksmith, was missing. His horse had returned riderless, the saddle smeared with blood. Silas Crowley stood on the steps of the church, illuminated by the flickering light of a dozen torches held by the men of the town. He looked like a prophet of doom, his face grave, his suit black as the night gathered around them. "We gave them every chance," Crowley's voice boomed, echoing off the wooden storefronts. "We offered them peace. We offered them reservations. And how do they repay us? By dragging a good man, a father, into the darkness of that canyon to be butchered." A roar of anger went up from the crowd. It was a sound that chilled Elise to the bone. It was the sound of men who had stopped thinking and started hating. "We ride tonight, Tate," the rough cowboy shouted, waving a Winchester rifle. "We burn them out before they can kill Henderson." Elise pressed herself deeper into the shadows. She knew Henderson. He was a man who drank too much and often fell off his horse on the way home. But she also knew Crowley. She slipped away from the gathering, moving silently toward the back of the Intermountain Railroad office. The building was dark, save for a single lamp burning in the rear window. Crowley was still on the church steps, whipping the crowd into a frenzy, which meant his office was empty. She needed proof. The back door was locked, but the window was unlatched. Elise hiked up her skirts and climbed through, dropping quietly onto the floorboards. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke, the same scent she had found in the canyon. She moved to the heavy oak desk, her hands trembling. She rifled through the stacks of survey maps and land deeds. Nothing, just numbers and lines. She opened the drawer, a bottle of brandy, a box of cartridges. Then she saw it, a leather portfolio tucked under a ledger. She pulled it out and flipped it open. It was a contract. The header read, Intermountain Railroad Company, Montana Expansion Project. Elise scanned the dense legal text, her finger tracing the lines in the dim light of the lamp. Clause 17. Upon the successful acquisition of the Bitter Creek water rights and the removal of hostile impediments from the canyon road, the signatory, Silas Crowley, shall receive a bonus of $5,000 and a 3% stake in the local depot revenue. Removal of hostile impediments. That was what Kai and his people were to him. Impediments, like boulders to be blasted or trees to be felled. And then, a letter clipped to the back, dated 2 days ago. Crowley, if the Army does not act by the 1st of the month, take local measures. We need the track laid before the frost. Use the dynamite shipment to clear the rockfall near the spring. If the natives are still there, that is your problem. Elise gasped. Dynamite. He was not just going to kill them. He was going to blow up the canyon itself to make a flat road for his train. Voices outside made her freeze. Make sure you have the arrows. A voice hissed. It was Crowley. He had returned sooner than she expected. I have them? Another voice answered. It sounded like Garrett, the foreman. Got them from a trader in Santa Fe. They look real enough. Good, Crowley said. When the shooting starts, make sure you plant a few in Henderson's body. We need the coroner to see them. We need the headlines in the Eastern papers to read Massacre by Savages. And Henderson. He is tied up in the old mine shaft, Crowley said, his voice devoid of emotion. He will not be talking to anyone, ever. Elise felt bile rise in her throat. Henderson was not kidnapped. He was a prisoner of the very man leading the rescue party. She waited until their footsteps faded toward the front of the building. Then she scrambled back out the window. She hit the ground running. She did not run home. She ran straight to the church. The posse was mounting up. There were more than 20 of them ranchers, drifters, shopkeepers all armed, all terrified, all dangerous. Stop! Elise screamed, pushing through the crowd. Stop! You are being lied to! The men turned. Tate glared at her from his horse. Go home, girl. This is men's work. It is not work. It is murder, Elise shouted, waving the paper she had stolen. Though in the darkness, it was just a white blur. Crowley is lying to you. Henderson is not in the canyon. Crowley has him. I heard him. Crowley emerged from the shadows, his face a mask of pitying concern. Elise, my dear, you are hysterical. I saw the contract, Elise yelled, turning to the sheriff. He is getting paid to clear the canyon for the train. He's going to use dynamite. He told Garrett to plant fake arrows. She is confused. Sheriff, Crowley said smoothly. The grief over her wagon, the stress. She has been spending a lot of time wandering the hills. Some folks say she has been seeing things, hearing voices. I am not crazy. Elise stepped toward the sheriff. Please listen to me. If you ride into that canyon, you are killing innocent people for a railroad company. Enough, Tate spurred his horse forward, cutting her off. We know where your loyalties lie. Miss Carter, we have seen you looking at the ridge. Maybe you are the one who told them when to raid the Millers. The crowd murmured. The suspicion was ugly and immediate. She is bewitched by them. A woman in the crowd whispered, Traitor! Someone else coughed. Elise looked at the faces she had known all her life. They were close to her. Fear and greed had sealed their ears. She realized then that words would not save anyone tonight. You are wrong, Elise said, her voice shaking but clear. And God will judge you for this. She turned and ran, not away from the danger, but toward the only creature in town that could help her, the roan gelding tied at the hitching post of the general store. Get her, Tate shouted. Elise vaulted onto the horse, not bothering to check the cinch. She kicked the gelding hard, and the horse bolted. A gunshot cracked behind her, the bullet whistling past her ear, but she did not look back. She flattened herself against the horse's neck and rode for the darkness of the west. The moon was full, a giant silver eye staring down at the crimes of men. It lit the prairie in ghostly shades of blue and gray. Elise rode as she had never ridden before, the wind tearing the pins from her hair, the tears drying on her cheeks before they could fall. She had to beat them. She had to warn him. The entrance to the canyon loomed ahead, a black mouth swallowing the moonlight. As she rode closer, she heard it the sound of drums, a low, rhythmic heartbeat pulsing from the earth. It was the night of the ceremony. She galloped through the narrow pass, the horse's hooves clattering on the stone. She did not slow down for the brush or the sharp turns. She rode straight for the hidden alcove. The scene that greeted her would have been beautiful in any other moment. Dozens of Navajo families were gathered around the spring. Fires burned low, casting dancing shadows on the red walls. The men were chanting, a sound that vibrated with reverence and history. Kai was there, standing near the water, wearing ceremonial paint, his eyes closed in prayer. "Kai!" Elise's scream shattered the sacred rhythm. The chanting stopped. Every head turned. Warriors grabbed their rifles. Elise pulled the heaving horse to a halt, nearly sliding off. "Run! You have to run! They are coming!" Kai was at her side in an instant, catching her as she stumbled. "Elise, what is happening?" "Crowley!" She gasped, clutching his arm. "The whole town! 20 men! They think you took Henderson!" "They are coming to kill everyone. They have dynamite." Kai's face hardened into stone. He looked at the elders, then at the women and children. "Go!" Kai shouted in Navajo. "Take the high path. Get the children to the caves now." Panic rippled through the camp, but it was a disciplined panic. Mothers grabbed babies. Elders were helped to their feet. "It is too late," Elise whispered, looking back at the canyon entrance. The sound of galloping horses echoed off the walls, magnified 100 times by the acoustics of the stone. "Get behind me," Kai ordered, pushing Elise toward a large boulder. The first torch appeared around the bend, followed by the crack of a rifle. The battle did not start with a parley. It started with a volley of lead. The posse fired blindly into the camp. Bullets chipped the sandstone, sending razor-sharp shards flying. A woman screamed as a cooking pot near her shattered. "Return fire!" Kai yelled, raising his own rifle. The Navajo warriors, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the ferocity of men defending their families. They used the rocks for cover, their shots disciplined and precise. Elise huddled behind the boulder, her hands over her ears. The noise was deafening. It was not just gunfire. It was the screaming of horses, the shouting of men, and the roar of fire as the posse threw torches into the dry brush shelters. Then, the earth shook. Boom! A massive explosion rocked the canyon floor. Crowley's men had thrown a stick of dynamite at the base of the cliff, trying to collapse the escape route. A shower of rocks rained down, choking the air with red dust. Elise coughed, her eyes stinging. Through the mist, she saw Tate riding through the camp, firing his pistol at anything that moved. He saw her. "There she is," Tate yelled. "The traitor bitch." He leveled his gun at her. Elise froze. She looked down the barrel of the weapon, seeing the flash of the muzzle. But the bullet never reached her. Kai slammed into her, tackling her to the ground just as the gun went off. She felt the impact of the bullet hitting him. It was a dull thud, followed by a sharp grunt of pain. "Kai!" Elise screamed. He rolled off her, clutching his left shoulder. Blood dark and slick welled up between his fingers, staining the ceremonial paint on his chest. "I am fine," he gritted out, trying to rise. His face was gray with shock. "You are shot!" Elise pressed her hands over his, trying to staunch the flow. The warm, metallic smell of blood filled her nose, mixing with the smoke and sulfur. "Stay down," Kai commanded, but his voice was weaker. The firing slowed. The Navajo warriors had retreated to the upper ledges, pinning the posse down. But on the canyon floor, the battle was lost. The camp was burning. Crowley rode into the circle of light, his horse stepping daintily over a fallen blanket. He held a heavy revolver in his hand. He looked around, his eyes landing on Elise and the wounded Kai. "Cease fire!" Crowley shouted. The cowboys lowered their guns, though they kept them trained on the shadows. Crowley dismounted. He walked toward them, his boots kicking up dust. He looked at Kai, bleeding in the dirt, and smiled. "Well," Crowley said, "the great warrior. Not so much of a threat now. Are you—" He grabbed Elise by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She struggled, clawing at his hand. But he was strong. He jammed the barrel of his revolver against her temple. "Elise," Kai lunged, but he collapsed back, the pain in his shoulder overwhelming him. "Stay there, boy," Crowley warned. Cocking the hammer of the gun, the click sounded like a cracking bone in the silence. "Tell your men to throw down their weapons," Crowley shouted to the cliffs above. "Or the girl dies, I will paint this rock with her brains, and I will tell the town the savages did it." High above, the Navajo warriors hesitated. They had a clear shot at Crowley, but if they took it, his reflex would pull the trigger. Elise stood frozen, the cold metal of the gun biting into her skin. She looked at Crowley. Up close, he did not look like a businessman. He looked like a monster. His eyes were empty of anything human, no fear, no regret, only a cold calculation of profit. "You will never get away with this," Elise whispered. "The truth will come out. The truth is what I write in the history books." "My dear," Crowley sneered, "and in my book, you were a tragic victim of the Indian Wars, a martyr for progress." He tightened his grip. "Last chance, drop the guns." The silence stretched, agonizing and thin. Kai looked up at Elise, his eyes full of helpless rage and love. He began to reach for his knife with his good hand. A suicide move. "No," Elise breathed. Then, a voice spoke from the darkness behind Crowley. "Put it down." It was a small voice, trembling but determined. Crowley turned his head slightly. Sam Carter stood there. The 12-year-old boy was covered in dust, his face streaked with tears. In his hands, shaking violently, was his father's heavy Colt Dragoon pistol. The barrel was wavering, pointing generally at Crowley. "Sam," Elise gasped. "Sam, go back." "Put her down," Sam said, sniffing back snot and tears. "You are a bad man, Mr. Crowley." Crowley laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Go home, boy. That gun is too big for you. You will blow your own foot off." "Sam," Elise said, her voice steadying. She looked straight at her brother. She did not see a child. She saw the only hope they had left. "Remember what Father said about the sights? Line them up. Sam, do not look at his face. Look at the target." "Shut up," Crowley roared, pressing the gun harder against her head. "Drop it, kid, or I'll kill your sister right now." Sam's breathing hitched. He looked terrified. "Sam," Elise said softly, "do not be afraid." "Do what is right." Sam closed one eye. He stopped shaking. For 1 second, he was as still as the stone around them. Bang! The roar of the heavy pistol was deafening. Crowley screamed. The bullet did not hit his head or his heart. Sam had aimed for the weapon. The heavy lead slug smashed into Crowley's right hand, shattering the bones and sending the revolver spinning into the darkness. Crowley fell to his knees, clutching his mangled hand, howling in shock and pain. Elise did not hesitate. She kicked Crowley in the chest, sending him sprawling onto his back. At the same moment, Kai moved, ignoring his wound. He launched himself off the ground like a panther. He landed on Crowley, his knife flashing in the firelight. He pressed the blade against Crowley's throat. "Do not move!" Kai snarled, his voice a guttural growl. The posse raised their guns again, but suddenly, the cliffs above erupted with the sound of cocking rifles. 50 Navajo warriors had the cowboys in their sights. "Drop them!" Sam yelled, rushing forward to stand beside Elise, pointing the smoking pistol at Tate. Tate looked at the boy, then at the warriors on the cliff, then at his boss bleeding in the dirt under Kai's knife. He slowly lowered his rifle. "It is over," Elise said, her voice ringing through the canyon. She looked down at Crowley, who was whimpering in the dust. "The railroad stops here." She knelt beside Kai, placing her hand on his back. He was breathing hard, his blood soaking into the earth. But he was alive. He looked up at her, and in the midst of the fire and the ruin, a fierce, triumphant light burned in his eyes. They had held the line. The cost was high, but the water was still running, and the canyon still belonged to itself. The smoke that hung over the Red Canyon was not the blue, sweet-smelling smoke of a campfire. It was gray and acrid, the scent of burnt canvas and gunpowder. The echo of Sam's pistol shot had faded, swallowed by the immense silence of the stone walls. But the ringing in Elise's ears remained. The battle was over. ended not by a treaty, but by the shock of a 12-year-old boy pulling a trigger on the canyon floor. The scene was a tableau of devastation. Silas Crowley lay in the dust, clutching his shattered hand, his face gray with shock. Around him, the posse of townsmen stood with their rifles lowered, looking like men waking from a fever dream. The Navajo warriors on the ridges kept their weapons trained on the valley floor, but they did not fire. There were bodies on the ground. 2 cowboys lay still near the blackened remains of a brush shelter. Near the water, a young Navajo man sat slumped against a rock, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged gasps. Elise knelt beside Kai. His weight was heavy against her, and the blood from his shoulder was warm and slick on her hands. He was conscious, his teeth gritted against the pain, his eyes scanning the perimeter with the instinct of a man who expects betrayal even in victory. "It is done," Elise whispered, pressing her palm against the wound to staunch the flow. "Kai, look at me. It is done." "It is never done," Kai rasped, though he let his head rest back against her knee. Tate, the rough cowboy who had led the charge, walked slowly toward where Crowley lay. He did not look at his employer with concern. He looked at the leather satchel that had been torn from Crowley's saddle during the struggle. It lay open in the dirt, papers spilling out like white feathers. Tate bent down and picked up a heavy sheaf of documents. He squinted at them in the moonlight. "What is that?" the sheriff asked, his voice hollow. He was holstering his gun, looking at the carnage with the dawning horror of a man realizing he had almost committed a massacre. "It is a contract," Tate said. He looked up, his eyes hard. "Between the Intermountain Railroad and Silas Crowley." He walked over to the sheriff, shoving the paper into his chest. "Read it. Read the part about the bonus." The sheriff fumbled for his spectacles. He read aloud, his voice trembling in the quiet canyon. "Bonus of $5,000 payable upon the total clearance of the canyon route. An additional 3% share of depot revenue." He flipped the page. Instruction dated October 3rd. Use the dynamite to clear the rockfall. If the natives are an impediment, remove them. Make it look like a tribal conflict. A murmur went through the posse. These were men who had ridden out believing they were avenging a kidnapped neighbor. They had been told they were protecting their women and children. Now, standing in the ashes of a family camp, they realized they were nothing more than hired guns for a land grab. "And Henderson?" a rancher asked, looking around wildly. "Where is Henderson?" "Ask him," Elise said, her voice cutting through the air. She pointed a bloody hand at Crowley. "He told his men to plant fake arrows on the bodies. He has Henderson tied up in the old mine shaft." Crowley groaned, trying to sit up. "She lies. She is—" Tate kicked Crowley in the ribs. It was a vicious, efficient blow. "Shut your mouth, before I finish what the boy started." The anger of the mob, once directed at the Navajo, swerved violently toward the man in the fine suit. But it was a quiet anger now, tempered by shame. They looked at the Navajo families emerging from the caves, women clutching crying babies, elders with faces etched in stone. They looked at the burning shelters. The sheriff took off his hat, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. "We have made a grave mistake." The sun rose on a valley that changed forever. The dead were gathered. It was a somber, silent task. The cowboys wrapped their 2 fallen comrades in blankets. The Navajo prepared their dead with chants that sounded like the wind moving through pine trees. There was no segregation in death. The bodies were laid out on the flat rocks near the stream, side by side. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The townspeople wanted to leave, to flee back to their homes and scrub the guilt from their skin. But the sheriff ordered them to stay. A detachment of federal cavalry, the real army, had been spotted on the ridge. They had been drawn by the explosion of the dynamite. Elise stood near the water, washing the blood from her hands. She felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond measure. "You should go," a voice said behind her. It was Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife. She was standing with a group of townswomen who had arrived with the wagons to help the wounded. Her face was pinched and hard. "Go where?" Elise asked, not turning around. "Away." "Mrs." Gable said, "You brought this down on us. You and that man. You chose their side against your own." "I chose the truth," Elise said, standing up and turning to face them. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, her hands stained red. She looked like a spirit of vengeance. "You are a traitor," another woman spat. "Look at my husband. He has a bullet in his leg because of you. He has a bullet in his leg because he rode here to kill women and children for money," Elise shouted back. "Get her out of here," a man growled. "We do not want her kind in Red Creek, taken up with savages. It is unnatural." The circle of hostility tightened around Elise. She stood her ground, but she felt the tears pricking her eyes. After everything, after the fear, the courage, the blood, they still only saw lines drawn in the sand. "Stop!" The command did not come from a man. It came from Martha Carter. Martha walked through the crowd. She looked older than she had yesterday. She was wearing her Sunday dress, covered in dust. She walked straight to Elise and stood beside her. She took Elise's bloody hand on her own. "If she is a traitor," Martha said, her voice shaking but loud, "then so am I." "Martha?" "Mrs." Gable gasped. "You cannot mean that. She has shamed you." "Shame," Martha laughed, a brittle sound. "You talk of shame. I nearly sold my daughter to that monster Crowley because I was afraid. That is a shame. My son," she pointed to Sam, who was sleeping exhaustedly against a rock, "had to pick up a gun because the men of this town were too blind to see the devil leading them. That is a shame." She looked at the crowd, her eyes blazing. "My daughter saved your lives. If she had not warned them, if she had not stopped the massacre, the army would have hanged every one of you for murder. She saw what was right when we only saw what was easy." Martha squeezed Elise's hand. "She is Carter, and this is our home. If you want to drive her out, you will have to burn us out, just like Crowley tried to do." The crowd fell silent. Eyes dropped to the ground. The shame that had been simmering finally boiled over, silencing the prejudice. But the judgment was not only on one side. Near the cave entrance, the Navajo warriors were gathered. Kai sat on a buffalo robe, his shoulder bound in bandages made from trade cloth. He was pale, his strength drained by blood loss, but he was alert. A young warrior, whose brother lay among the dead, stood over him. "You brought them here, Kai Yazi. You trusted the white girl. You told us to wait, and now my brother walks the spirit path. I told you to wait because war is the end of us," Kai said quietly. "If we had struck first, there would be no survivors here today, only ghosts." "They came anyway," the young warrior shouted, "because you let them get close." "Peace," said a voice like dry leaves scraping together. Hosteen Nez, the eldest of the band, stepped forward. He leaned on a staff of juniper wood. He looked at the young warrior, then at Kai, then at Elise and Martha standing in the distance. "We bleed," Hosteen Nez said. "That is true, but we are still here. The canyon is still ours." He pointed a gnarled finger at the dead cowboys. "The white men came with hate in their hearts. But one white boy stopped the gun. One white girl rode into the fire to warn us." The elder looked at Kai. "You walked between the worlds. Kai, it is a hard path. You are cut by the thorns on both sides, but do not let them say you failed. You saved the water. We judge a man by his actions, not by the color of the hand he holds." The young warrior looked at the elder, then down at Kai. He did not apologize, but he stepped back, lowering his head in a sign of respect. As evening fell, a lieutenant from the cavalry arrived with a dozen troopers. He was a young officer, weary from the saddle, but he possessed a distinct lack of patience for civilian foolishness. He set up a command tent near the canyon entrance. He listened to Elise. He listened to the sheriff. He listened to Sam. And finally, he listened to Hosteen Nedern, with Kai translating. Then he read the papers from the satchel. "This contract is invalid," the lieutenant declared, tossing the papers onto his portable desk. "It is a fraud, conspiracy to incite insurrection, and attempted murder." He looked at the sheriff. You will transport Mr. Crowley to the federal marshal in Helena. If he survives the journey with that hand, he will hang. If not, he saves the government the cost of a rope." The lieutenant stood up and walked to the map of the territory pinned to his tent pole. He traced the line of the creek. "As for this land," he said, looking at the gathered group, "the railroad has no claim here, not anymore. However, the government cannot simply leave it unregulated." He looked at Kai, then at the ranchers. "I am proposing a protected status. The canyon remains under federal jurisdiction, but usage rights are granted to the Navajo tribe for ceremonial and residential purposes. The water," he tapped the blue line on the map, "is to be shared. The ranchers may irrigate downstream, provided the flow is not obstructed at the source." It was not perfect. It was a government solution, full of lines and regulations, but it was survival. "We accept," Hostinez said. "We accept," the sheriff muttered. That night, the canyon was quiet. The soldiers had set up a perimeter, keeping the peace. The ranchers had gone home to lick their wounds. Elise walked to the small supply shed near the spring where they had moved Kai to keep him out of the wind. It was a rough structure, smelling of dry pine and sage. She pushed the door open softly. A small fire burned in the center of the dirt floor, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Kai was lying on a pile of blankets. He was awake, staring at the flames. When he saw her, he tried to sit up, but grimaced. "Lie still," Elise said, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, her skirts pooling on the earth. She carried a basin of clean water and a fresh cloth. "You stayed," Kai said. His voice was rough, stripped of all defenses. "I told you," Elise said, dipping the cloth into the cool water. "I am not going anywhere." She gently peeled back the bandage on his shoulder. The wound was angry and red, but the bleeding had stopped. She cleaned it with careful, reverent strokes. Her hands, which had been so steady when she confronted the mob, were trembling now. Kai watched her face. He saw the exhaustion, the soot on her cheek, the fierce determination in her set jaw. "You saved us," he whispered. "Sam saved us," Elise corrected, focusing on the wound. I just screamed." "You rode into a war," Kai said. He reached out with his good hand and covered hers, stopping her movements. "Elise, look at me." She looked up. The firelight reflected in his dark eyes, making them burn with an intensity that took her breath away. "They wanted to kill you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "When I saw the gun at your head, I felt the world ending." "I was so afraid," Elise admitted, a tear finally escaping and tracking through the dust on her face. "I thought I would never see you again. I thought we would die without ever knowing what this could be." "We are alive," Kai said. He pulled her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss into her palm. It was a gesture of such intimacy, such worship, that Elise felt a sob rise in her throat. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his uninjured shoulder. "They hate us, Kai, the town, some of your people. They hate what we are." "Let them hate," Kai murmured, his hand moving up to stroke her hair. "They live in fear. We live in truth." He shifted, making room for her on the blankets. It was a simple invitation, but it carried the weight of a vow. Elise lay down beside him, careful of his wound. They lay facing each other, bodies not touching except for their hands, which were clasped tight between them. The fire crackled, popping softly. On the wall of the shed, their shadows merged into one single shape, dark and unbroken. "Does it hurt?" she whispered, echoing the words she had said in the cave during the storm. "No," Kai lied, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. "Not anymore." They did not need to do more. The air between them was charged with a connection deeper than skin. They had bled for each other. They had stood against their own blood for each other, in the quiet of the shed, surrounded by the scent of sage and the memory of violence. They found a peace that was entirely their own. They slept, hands locked, two survivors on the edge of a new world. 2 days later, the wagons began to roll again, but this time, The mood was different. Martha Carter stood on the porch of the ranch house. The sign that had hung there for 10 years, Carter Ranch, had been taken down. In the yard, Sam was painting a new one. Red Rock Way Station, food lodging. Elise walked up the steps, carrying a basket of laundry. She stopped beside her mother. They looked out at the road. A group of Navajo were riding past, heading back toward the deep desert for the winter hunt. They did not look at the house with hostility. One of them raised a hand in greeting. Martha hesitated, then raised her hand back. "We will not sell the land," Martha said, her voice firm. "But we cannot run cattle like we used to. We do not have the men, and I will not marry Mr. Garrett or any other hired thug." "No," Elise said, "we will not. The lieutenant says the road through the valley will remain open," Martha continued. "Travelers will come. Soldiers, traders, natives. They will all need a place to stop, a place to eat, a place where no one asks which side of the war they were on." She turned to Elise. Her eyes were clear, the fear finally gone, replaced by a pragmatic strength. "It will be hard work," Martha said. "Harder than ranching." "I am not afraid of hard work," Elise said. "And him?" Martha asked, nodding toward the canyon where the dust of the riders was settling. "The warrior. He has his duties," Elise said. "And I have mine, but he will be back," Martha sighed, a long exhalation that seemed to release years of accumulated tension. "Well, if he is going to be coming around, he had better learn to chop wood. I will not have a man sitting idle on my porch, war hero or not." Elise smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt in months. It felt like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long, dark winter. "I will tell him," Elise said. She looked toward the canyon. The red walls stood tall and silent against the blue sky. They were no longer a place of fear. They were a cathedral. They were at home. And somewhere in those shadows, Kai was waiting, just as she was waiting. The war was over. Life was just beginning. The seasons turned, as they always did in the Montana Territory, indifferent to the struggles of men and the shifting of borders. Winter came down from the high peaks with teeth of ice, burying the red canyon in silence and snow, only to retreat before the green rush of spring. By the time the summer of 1879 arrived, the scorched earth where the battle had been fought was covered in a blanket of wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, and lupine, hiding the scars of the fire and the blood. The sign swinging above the main gate of the Carter property was new, the paint fresh and bold against the weathered wood Red Rock Way Station. It was noon, and the yard was bustling. A stagecoach bound for Helena had just pulled in, the horses lathered and blowing. 2 freight wagons were parked near the barn, their drivers swapping tobacco and stories in the shade. And near the water trough, 3 Navajo riders were watering their ponies, their turquoise jewelry flashing in the sun. Martha Carter stepped out onto the porch. She wiped her hands on her apron, her face flushed from the heat of the ovens. A year ago, the sight of Navajo warriors in her yard would have sent her running for the shotgun. Today, she walked down the steps with a pitcher of cold lemonade. "Ya'ati," Martha said, the Navajo greeting rolling off her tongue with a thick but practiced accent. The lead rider, an older man with a weathered face, smiled and tipped his head. "Ya'ati, Martha, the heat is heavy today." "It is a scorcher," she agreed, pouring cups for them. "Elise has a stew on the fire if you are hungry. Beef and green chilies." Sam, now 13 and shooting up like a weed, came around the corner of the barn carrying an armful of firewood. He was no longer the terrified boy holding a shaking pistol. His shoulders had broadened, and there was a quiet confidence in his stride. He nodded to the riders, who greeted him by name. Sam had learned that a man was not defined by how quickly he could pull a trigger, but by how steadily he could hold his ground. He had killed the hate in his heart the moment he pulled the trigger on Silas Crowley, replacing it with a grim understanding of justice inside the main house, which had been expanded to include a dining hall for travelers. Elise was working the dough for the evening biscuits. She paused, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. She looked out the window toward the canyon road. She was waiting. The sound of hoofbeats, distinct and familiar, reached her ears before the rider appeared. It was not the heavy plodding of a draft horse or the frantic clatter of a stagecoach team. It was the rhythmic, fluid gait of a mountain pony. Elise abandoned the doe. She wiped her hands and walked out the back door, her heart doing that traitorous, wonderful leap it always did, even after a year. Kai was riding in from the West Ridge. He had been gone for 4 days, scouting the upper passes for the army, ensuring that the new trails did not encroach on the sacred sites deep within the canyon. He wore the dust of the trail like a second skin. His hair was tied back, and he wore a mixture of buckskin and a calico shirt Elise had sewn for him. He swung down from the horse with an ease that made him seem part of the animal. He did not stop to tie the reins. The horse stood ground-tied, trained by a master. Kai turned and saw her. His dark eyes, often so guarded around strangers, softened instantly. He did not smile broadly, that was not his way, but the tension left his shoulders, and his gaze held hers with a physical intensity. "You are back," Elise said, walking toward him. "The pass is clear." Kai said. He stepped close, ignoring the travelers watching from the yard. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "And I was hungry. For the stew," Elise teased softly. "For the sight of you." Kai answered. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a hidden kiss in a dark cave, nor a desperate kiss in the face of death. It was a claim. It was a husband greeting his wife in the light of day. A hush fell over the stagecoach passengers near the barn. A woman from Boston adjusted her spectacles, whispering loudly to her husband about the impropriety of it all. But the freight drivers just grinned, and the Navajo riders went back to their water. In the Red Rock way station, the union of Elise Carter and Kai Yazzie was as much a fact of life as the canyon itself. They had married in the autumn, when the cottonwood trees in the valley turned to gold. It had been a ceremony of 2 worlds. In the morning, the Reverend from Red Creek had come, standing stiffly in the parlor, reading from the King James Bible about obedience and grace. He had done it grudgingly, perhaps, but he had done it, knowing that the tide of the town had turned. In the afternoon, they had ridden to the alcove in the canyon. There was no Bible there. Hostine Nez had performed the Navajo wedding rite. They had washed their hands in the sacred water of the spring. They had eaten corn mush from a wedding basket, sharing the nourishment just as they promised to share their lives. Elise wore a silver ring on her finger and a turquoise bead on a leather thong around her neck. She did not choose between them. She was the bridge. "Did you hear the news from Helena?" Elise asked as they walked toward the house, Kai's hand resting on the small of her back. "The telegraph lines do not reach the high ridges." Kai said. "Crowley," Elise said, the name no longer carrying the power to terrify her. "The trial is over. The judge gave him 20 years in the federal penitentiary for fraud, attempted murder, and incitement of insurrection." Kai nodded slowly. 20 years in a cage. It is a slow death for a man who wanted to own the world. "They say he cried when they took him away," Elise added. "He still blamed us. He said we ruined the future." "He ruined himself," Kai said. "The land rejected him." They entered the kitchen, the coolness of the adobe and wood offering relief from the sun. Martha was there, cutting beef. She looked up and nodded at Kai. "There is water in the basin." "Kai," Martha said, "wash up. You smell like a horse." "It is a good horse, Martha," Kai replied deadpan, moving to the basin. Martha hid a smile. The truce between them had grown into a genuine, if prickly, affection. She knew that this man would die for her daughter, and for a woman who had lived in fear for so long. That loyalty was worth more than all the gold in Crowley's failed railroad. That evening, the dining hall was full. The mix of people was strange and beautiful. A cavalry sergeant sat at a table eating chili, while 2 Navajo trackers sat nearby sharing tobacco. A family of settlers heading for Oregon looked around with wide eyes, clearly unsure what to make of the arrangement. Elise moved among the tables, refilling coffee cups. She caught snippets of conversation. The settlers were asking about the road ahead, about the dangers of the pass. "Ask him," Elise said, pointing to Kai, who was sitting by the hearth whittling a piece of cedar for Sam. "He knows the mountain better than the mapmakers." The settler, a burly man with a beard, looked hesitant. He looked at Kai's long hair, the knife in his hand. "The Indian. His name is Kai," Elise said firmly. "And he is the reason this road is open." Kai looked up. He did not scowl. He gestured for the man to bring his map. Within minutes, the settler and the warrior were leaning over the parchment, Kai tracing a line with his finger, explaining in his deep, accented English where the water could be found and where the rock slides were prone to happen. Elise watched them, a warmth spreading through her chest. This was the dream they had whispered about in the dark after the battle, a place where the fear could be laid down with the weapons, a place where stories could be traded instead of insults. Later, after the guests had retired to the bunkhouse or their wagons, and the lamps had been dimmed, Elise and Kai walked out to the porch. The night air was cool and smelled of sage and cooling earth. The moon hung heavy over the canyon walls, painting the world in silver and shadow. "They stared at us today," Elise said quietly, leaning against the railing. "The woman from Boston. She looked at me like I was a curiosity in a carnival." Kai stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Let them stare. They are looking at something they do not understand. They look for fences, and they see only open ground." "Do you think it will ever change?" she asked. "Will there ever be a time when they do not see us as a contradiction?" "Maybe," Kai said. "Or maybe not, but we do not live for them. Elise, we live for the water, for the land, for this." He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, right over her pulse. "I missed you," she whispered, turning in his arms. "I saw you in every cloud," Kai said, "in the shape of the hawk's wing, in the quiet of the snow." He took her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. "Come, the night is ours." They did not go back inside. They walked away from the house, past the barn, and down the trail that led to the canyon entrance. They walked in silence, a comfortable, companionable silence that only lovers know. They reached the alcove, their place. The spring bubbled up from the earth, singing its eternal song. The moonlight turned the water into liquid mercury. Elise sat on the flat rock where she had once stood trembling, clutching a cigar stub and a brass casing, terrified of the man who now held her heart. She pulled her sketchbook from her pocket. She opened it to a new page. "What are you drawing?" Kai asked, sitting beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Us," Elise said. She sketched quickly, the charcoal capturing the line of the canyon wall, the curve of the spring, and in the center, she drew two figures. Not enemies, not strangers, but a man and a woman standing side by side, their roots growing into the same red earth. She showed it to him. Kai looked at it for a long time. He traced the figures with his finger. "You drew me with too many muscles," he teased gently. "I drew you exactly as you are," Elise countered, smiling. "I remember the first time I saw you here, under that waterfall." Kai laughed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated against her ribs. "You looked like a deer caught in a box canyon. You were shaking so hard I thought you would shatter." "I was terrified," Elise admitted. "I had never seen a naked man, and I had certainly never seen a Navajo warrior who looked like a god." Kai's smile faded into a look of intense tenderness. "And I saw a girl who I thought was a spy, but she turned out to be a warrior stronger than any I have ridden with." He took the sketchbook from her and set it on the rock. He pulled her into his lap, her skirts billowing around them. "You are not that girl anymore," Kai said. "No," Elise whispered, running her hands through his hair, freeing it from the leather tie. "I am not." She was no longer the girl who prayed for a small, safe life. She was the woman who had ridden into the fire. She was the woman who had stood before a mob and claimed her truth. She was the keeper of the way station, the wife of the scout, the guardian of the canyon. "I love you," she said. The words were simple, but in the vast silence of the night, they felt huge. "I am yours," Kai answered in his own language. "Ayu aninishni." He kissed her then, deep and slow, a kiss that tasted of the journey they had taken. It was the taste of dust and rain, of fear overcome, of blood washed clean. It was the taste of freedom. Above them, the stars wheeled across the sky, indifferent and eternal, the same stars that shone on the cities of the east and the deserts of the south. But here, in this hidden fold of the earth, they seemed to shine a little brighter. The wind picked up, sighing through the pinon pines. It carried the sound of the drum from the distant reservation, a steady, rhythmic beat that matched the pulse of the land. It carried the laughter of the cowboys back at the station. It carried the whisper of the water. Elise rested her head on Kai's shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, the solid reality of him anchoring her to the world. She remembered the girl she had been 18 years old, standing on the edge of a cliff, afraid to fall. She had fallen, in the end, but she had not crashed. She had been caught, and in the arms of the man the world called a savage. She had found the only civilization that mattered. The West was still wild. There would be other storms, other droughts, other men like Crowley who sought to tame what could not be broken. But they would face them together. Elise Carter and Kai Yazzie sat by the spring until the moon began to set. Two souls woven into the tapestry of the red rocks, living a story that no history book would ever fully understand, but which the canyon would remember forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Elise and Kai. I hope their journey from fear to freedom resonated with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button to support the channel. And if you really loved it, smash that hype button so this story can reach even more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning and the stories alive. Thank you, and happy trails.